The first sign that something had gone terribly wrong came not from a palace announcement, but from a stunned silence outside St. Mary Magdalene Church at Sandringham. For years, Zara Tindall had walked that familiar path alongside the royal family without question. Then, according to whispers circulating among royal observers, she suddenly stopped at the gates. What happened next sparked a wave of speculation that reached far beyond a single Christmas morning and into the heart of a monarchy struggling to redefine itself. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Christmas at Sandringham had always been more than a holiday gathering. It was a tradition woven into the identity of the royal family itself, a carefully maintained ritual that projected continuity, unity, and stability to the public. Yet beneath the polished surface of that year's celebrations, something felt different. Security measures had reportedly been intensified. New protocol officers had allegedly been assigned to oversee key aspects of the event. Attendance procedures that had once been routine were now said to be subject to stricter verification standards. To most observers, these changes appeared insignificant. After all, heightened security around the royal family was hardly unusual. But in hindsight, many would come to view those preparations as the first pieces of a much larger puzzle. As guests arrived and final arrangements fell into place, few suspected that an unexpected moment was about to disrupt what should have been a seamless morning. Zara Tindall, a figure long associated with royal gatherings and family traditions, reportedly approached the service expecting the same uncomplicated entry she had experienced countless times before. There was no indication that anything unusual awaited her. No warning, no public announcement, no suggestion that her arrival would become the subject of intense discussion across royal circles. Then came the confusion. According to accounts that later circulated among observers, an unexpected issue emerged at one of the security checkpoints. What exactly triggered it remains the subject of endless speculation. Some sources suggested a procedural discrepancy. Others hinted at a verification problem linked to the newly implemented protocols. Whatever the cause, the normal rhythm of the morning reportedly faltered. Conversations that should have lasted seconds appeared to stretch into uncomfortable minutes. Staff members who were expected to move guests efficiently through the process allegedly found themselves exchanging uncertain glances. The atmosphere quickly shifted. Those nearby reportedly noticed tension spreading among personnel responsible for managing arrivals. Quiet discussions became increasingly urgent. Questions were exchanged. Clarifications were sought. Yet no immediate explanation appeared forthcoming. The uncertainty itself became part two of the story. What made the situation even more intriguing was the apparent lack of consensus among those connected to the event. Palace insiders, according to later reports, seemed divided in their interpretation of what had happened. Some allegedly viewed the incident as nothing more than an unfortunate administrative mistake created by new procedures and unfamiliar personnel. Others were far less convinced. They believed the confusion pointed toward deeper issues that had been developing behind the scenes for some time. As the morning continued, speculation began spreading with remarkable speed. Within royal circles, whispers multiplied. Every unanswered question generated 3 more. Was this simply a bureaucratic error magnified by public attention? Or had an ordinary security checkpoint accidentally exposed fractures within the institution itself? The absence of immediate clarification only fueled the growing intrigue, and before long the conversation had expanded far beyond the gates of Sandringham. But what appeared to be a simple security misunderstanding soon exposed deeper tensions that had been quietly building behind palace walls for months. The monarchy runs on tradition, but it survives through protocol. And sometimes, the smallest procedural change can create consequences nobody anticipates. In the days following the confusion at Sandringham, attention gradually shifted away from the brief moment at the church gates and toward a far more intriguing question. If Zara Tindall's unexpected delay had not been caused by a personal dispute or a dramatic confrontation, then what had actually gone wrong? The answer, according to whispers circulating among royal observers, may have been hidden within a series of procedural changes that had quietly taken shape long before Christmas morning arrived. What initially appeared to be a simple misunderstanding was now being examined through an entirely different lens. The focus was no longer on the individuals involved, Ved. It was on the system itself. Months earlier, efforts had reportedly begun to modernize certain aspects of event management surrounding royal engagements. Newly appointed protocol officers were allegedly tasked with reviewing long-standing procedures that had remained largely unchanged for years. Supporters of the initiative argued that modernization was necessary. The royal family was operating in a vastly different environment than it had a generation ago. Security concerns were evolving. Public scrutiny was increasing. Administrative processes needed to become more precise and accountable. On paper, the reforms appeared sensible. Few could have predicted that those same reforms would eventually become the center of a growing controversy. Among the most significant changes was a reported emphasis on accreditation and attendance verification. Historically, many members of the wider royal circle had attended traditional gatherings through established custom and familiarity. Certain names were simply expected to appear. Their presence was considered routine. But under the revised system, tradition alone was allegedly no longer enough. Documentation, confirmation procedures, and official records were said to carry greater importance than ever before. What seemed like a minor administrative adjustment represented a fundamental shift in how access was managed. As preparations for Christmas accelerated, reports began emerging that attendance lists had undergone multiple revisions. Last-minute updates allegedly circulated among departments responsible for coordinating the event. Some insiders suggested that changes were made to improve efficiency. Others hinted that confusion accompanied the revisions from the very beginning. The more details that surfaced, the more complicated the situation appeared. Interestingly, several reports claimed that senior royals had been informed of these procedural changes weeks in advance. If true, this raised another troubling question. Who exactly understood the new rules and who did not? Within an institution built upon hierarchy, communication often follows carefully defined channels. Information does not always reach everyone at the same time, and when assumptions replace clarity, misunderstandings can grow rapidly. That possibility became even more significant when discussions turned toward the status of extended family members. For generations, relationships within the royal family had operated according to a mixture of formal rank and personal connection. Yet the revised procedures reportedly required clearer categorization. Suddenly, long-standing assumptions about access were being re-examined. Individuals who had always been viewed as part of the family tradition could now find themselves subject to administrative definitions that felt surprisingly rigid. Inside palace circles, concern allegedly began to grow. Staff members worried that confusion might be inevitable if new systems collided with old expectations. What appeared orderly on paper could become far more complicated in practice. And as more accounts surfaced, some observers began noticing a troubling pattern. Zara's situation might not have been unique at all. Instead, it may have represented the first visible sign of broader issues hidden beneath the surface. As investigators of royal affairs dug deeper, attention shifted from the church gates to the documents that determined who belonged on the official list. Some whispered that the issue was never about security at all. It was about a name that allegedly wasn't where everyone expected it to be. As attention turned toward the documents governing attendance at Sandringham, the story entered a far more complicated and unsettling phase. What had begun as questions about a checkpoint delay was now evolving into an investigation of the paperwork behind the event itself. The assumption that a simple procedural error had caused the confusion was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. Behind closed doors, according to reports circulating among royal observers, administrators were allegedly examining records with growing urgency. The reason was simple, yet startling. The problem may not have been who arrived at the gates. The problem may have been what the official records actually said. Whispers began emerging that discrepancies had been discovered within attendance documentation connected to the Christmas gathering. At first, the claims seemed almost impossible to believe. Royal events are known for their meticulous planning and extensive preparation. Layers of oversight exist specifically to prevent confusion. Yet the rumors persisted. Sources suggested that officials reviewing the records encountered inconsistencies that demanded explanation. Names appeared differently across various versions. Details allegedly shifted from one document to another. What should have been straightforward suddenly appeared anything but. The situation became even more intriguing. NG when reports surfaced suggesting that multiple versions of guest documentation may have existed simultaneously. If true, this possibility introduced an entirely new dimension to the controversy. Which version had been considered authoritative? Which one had been distributed to security personnel? And perhaps most importantly, which document reflected the final intentions of those responsible for organizing the event? Every answer seemed to generate another layer of uncertainty. As these questions multiplied, palace administrators reportedly found themselves scrambling to verify details that should have been settled long before Christmas morning. The urgency surrounding those efforts only fueled speculation. Observers noted that institutions rarely move so quickly unless they recognize the potential seriousness of a situation. What might have appeared insignificant to the public was clearly attracting significant attention behind the scenes. The effort to establish a clear timeline became a story in itself. Responsibility quickly emerged as the central issue. If discrepancies truly existed, someone had ultimately approved the final attendance list. Someone had reviewed the records, authorized the documentation, and confirmed the arrangements. Yet identifying where accountability rested proved far more difficult than many expected. Modern royal operations involve numerous departments, advisors, coordinators, and administrators. Decisions often pass through multiple levels before receiving final approval. In such an environment, determining who made a critical mistake can become extraordinarily complicated. That complexity made Zara Tindall's reported involvement particularly surprising. This was not a distant relative appearing unexpectedly at a royal gathering. She was someone whose presence at family events had long been regarded as entirely routine. For years, she had occupied a familiar place within the wider royal circle. Her attendance at Christmas celebration, NS, had become part of the tradition itself. Because of that history, many observers struggled to understand how any administrative confusion could have arisen in the first place. The more commentators revisited previous Christmas gatherings, the more unusual the situation appeared. Memories of Zara's consistent participation only intensified public curiosity. If someone so closely associated with these family traditions could become connected to such confusion, what did that reveal about the systems operating behind the scenes? Suddenly, the story felt less like an isolated mishap and more like a warning sign. Speculation intensified. Some believed a simple oversight had spiraled into a public embarrassment. Others suspected deeper organizational problems hidden beneath years of smooth appearances. Meanwhile, media attention increasingly shifted away from the event itself and toward the palace administration responsible for managing it. The spotlight was no longer focused on what happened, net at the gates. It was focused on the machinery behind them. Yet the deeper officials searched for answers, the more another question emerged: who had authority to make such a consequential decision in the first place? Behind the scenes, one royal reportedly watched the unfolding controversy with increasing concern, and few understood palace protocol better than Princess Anne. As questions surrounding the Sandringham incident continued to multiply, attention gradually moved beyond paperwork, attendance lists, and administrative confusion. A deeper concern was beginning to take shape. This was no longer simply about whether a procedural mistake had occurred. It was about what that mistake represented. At the heart of the monarchy lies a delicate balance between tradition and adaptation, between preserving centuries of continuity and responding to the demands of a changing world. According to growing speculation within royal circles, few individuals understood that balance more clearly. Princess Anne. For decades, Anne had built a reputation unlike almost anyone else within the royal family. While others attracted headlines, she became known for consistency, discipline, and an unwavering commitment to duty. Her understanding of royal operations was not theoretical. It came from years of experience navigating the complex machinery that kept the institution functioning. That reputation made reports of her alleged interest in the Sandringham controversy especially significant. If concerns were being raised at her level, observers believed the matter was being treated far more seriously than the public initially realized. According to whispers circulating among palace insiders, Anne reportedly sought clarification regarding exactly how the situation had unfolded. The questions themselves were said to be straightforward, but their implications were enormous. How had confusion emerged around an event rooted so deeply in family tradition? Why had procedures that were ended to create efficiency instead generated uncertainty? And perhaps most importantly, what safeguards had failed along the way? As those questions circulated, senior aides allegedly began reviewing the chain of decisions that had led to the controversy. Piece by piece, they attempted to reconstruct the sequence of events. Every revision to a document, every approval, every procedural adjustment. The objective was not merely to identify what had happened, but to understand why it had happened. Yet the deeper they looked, the more complicated the picture appeared to become. What made the situation particularly sensitive was the role tradition played within the story. The annual Christmas gathering at Sandringham was more than a scheduled event. It represented continuity across generations. It symbolized family unity at a time when public attention was focused intensely on the monarchy's future. Any disruption to that tradition carried consequences beyond logistics. It touched on perception, confidence, and institutional credibility. That reality reportedly fueled growing concerns among senior figures responsible for protecting the monarchy's reputation. Even if the incident ultimately proved to be a simple administrative error, the public discussion surrounding it had already created uncomfortable questions. Stories involving confusion, miscommunication, and internal disagreement rarely remain confined to their original context. They evolve. They invite speculation. And sometimes they expose vulnerabilities that institutions would prefer to keep hidden. Reports soon emerged suggesting that private discussions were taking place among senior household officials. The central issue appeared to be larger than any single individual. How should the monarchy modernize without disrupting the traditions that gave it stability? How could procedures become more efficient without creating unintended consequences for family members accustomed to long-established practices? These were not easy questions, and there were no simple answers. Within that debate, Anne's reputation for directness reportedly shaped expectations. Many believed she would push for clarity rather than excuses, efficiency rather than ambiguity, resolution rather than endless discussion. As pressure mounted for an internal explanation, the controversy entered yet another phase. The focus was no longer on what had happened. The focus was shifting toward who had made it happen. But as the review continued, attention shifted toward the individuals responsible for implementing the new procedures. What began as an awkward moment at a church entrance was now evolving into a full examination of how royal events were being managed. By the time the immediate headlines surrounding Sandringham began to fade, the controversy had already transformed into something much larger than anyone initially expected. The discussion was no longer centered on a single morning, a single checkpoint, or even a single family member. Instead, attention had shifted toward the intricate system operating behind every royal appearance, every gathering, and every carefully orchestrated tradition. What started as a brief moment of confusion had become a test of confidence in the administrative structures responsible for preserving the monarchy's image. And as more questions surfaced, the pressure to uncover the truth intensified. According to reports circulating among royal observers, an internal review began focusing heavily on possible communication failures. This was where the story grew increasingly complicated. Procedures can only function effectively when information moves clearly through every level of an organization. Yet many insiders reportedly believed that somewhere along the chain, crucial details may not have reached the right people at the right time. Whether the issue involved documentation, verification, or interpretation, the possibility of a breakdown in communication became impossible to ignore. As scrutiny increased, attention naturally turned toward the newly appointed protocol team, whose reforms had already become the subject of widespread discussion. Their mission had reportedly been straightforward: modernize administrative processes, improve accountability, and ensure greater consistency across royal events. Yet intentions and outcomes are not always the same. What had been designed as an effort to strengthen procedures was now facing intense examination from both inside and outside palace circles. Every decision was being reconsidered through the lens of hindsight. Reports suggested that staff members connected to the event preparations were interviewed as part of efforts to reconstruct exactly what had happened. Administrators allegedly sought detailed accounts of meetings, approvals, communications, and last-minute changes. The objective was not simply to assign blame. It was to establish a clear understanding of how an issue that appeared minor on the surface had generated such significant consequences. Yet the further investigators explored, the more they encountered conflicting interpretations. Senior figures reportedly became determined to establish whether established procedures had actually been followed. That question carried enormous weight because it struck at the heart of institutional credibility. If rules had been ignored, accountability would become unavoidable. But if the procedures had been followed exactly as intended, then an even more troubling possibility emerged that the system itself contained flaws capable of creating confusion under pressure. Meanwhile, another challenge continued growing in the background. Public perception was beginning to take on a life of its own. Within royal institutions, perception often matters almost as much as reality. A misunderstanding can become accepted as fact if left unexplained. A rumor can overshadow a truth if uncertainty remains unresolved. Many insiders reportedly worried that specifically, speculation surrounding the controversy was becoming more powerful than the incident itself. Every unanswered question created space for new theories, and every theory expanded the story further. Complicating matters even more were reports that differing accounts of the morning continued to circulate. Some descriptions emphasized administrative confusion, others pointed toward procedural rigidity. A few suggested misunderstandings compounded by assumptions. The existence of multiple narratives made it increasingly difficult to separate verified details from growing speculation. Yet that task became essential if confidence was to be restored. At its core, the controversy had evolved into a debate about something far larger than one Christmas service. It forced uncomfortable questions about tradition, access, authority, and the delicate balance between preserving history and embracing change. The monarchy now found itself examining not only what happened, but what the incident revealed about its future direction. And as Christmas celebrations faded into memory, the larger implications of the controversy were only beginning to emerge. The Sandringham Christmas Walk has always represented more than a holiday gathering. It is a symbol of continuity, visibility, and family unity. That truth is precisely why the controversy refused to disappear. Long after discussions about attendance lists, procedural reviews, and administrative confusion began circulating, the deeper significance of the story continued to resonate. For generations, the Christmas service at Sandringham has occupied a unique place within the royal calendar. It is one of the rare occasions where tradition, family, and public expectation converge into a single moment. People do not simply watch the event because it is ceremonial. They watch because it represents something enduring. It reassures them that despite changing times, certain foundations remain intact. Throughout decades of royal history, the walk to ninth from the Christmas service has become a visible expression of continuity. Faces change. Generations rise and fall. Circumstances evolve. Yet the tradition survives, linking the present to the past. That symbolic power explains why even the slightest disruption can generate disproportionate attention. When questions emerge about who is present, who is absent, or how participation is determined, the discussion inevitably expands beyond logistics. It becomes a conversation about identity and belonging. Within that context, Zara Tindall occupies a particularly fascinating position. Although not a working royal, she has long maintained a respected place within the broader family structure. Over the years, she has cultivated a reputation grounded in authenticity, loyalty, and a strong connection to both royal traditions and ordinary public life. Her appearances at family gatherings have rarely attracted controversy because they have always felt natural, expected, and familiar. That familiarity made the Sandringham story especially compelling. Many observers struggled to reconcile the image of a well-established family figure with the uncertainty that had suddenly surrounded her participation. As public debate intensified, another question gradually moved to the forefront. What role should non-working royals play within official family events? It was a discussion that had been developing quietly for years but now found itself amplified by the controversy. Some argued that family traditions should remain inclusive, reflecting personal relationships as much as formal responsibilities. Others believed modern royal institutions required clearer distinctions regarding public representation. Neither side possessed an easy answer because both perspectives touched on legitimate concerns. This tension reflected a broader challenge confronting the monarchy itself. Every institution rooted in history must eventually face the question of adaptation. Change is necessary for survival, yet excessive change risks weakening the traditions that provide stability. The balance is delicate. Move too slowly and the institution appears outdated. Move too quickly and it risks losing the qualities that give it meaning. The Sandringham controversy seemed to expose exactly that dilemma. Royal commentators increasingly found themselves debating whether protocol had become overly rigid. Procedures exist to create order, but critics questioned whether strict administrative frameworks could sometimes overlook the human relationships that define family life. Supporters of modernization countered that consistency and accountability were essential in a world where public scrutiny had never been greater. What began as a discussion about one Christmas gathering was evolving into a much larger examination of how the monarchy intended to navigate the future. The implications stretched well beyond a single event. If traditions were being redefined, what might future family gatherings look like? Would long-standing customs remain unchanged, or would administrative structures continue reshaping how participation was determined? These questions lingered long after the immediate controversy subsided, leaving uncertainty where confidence had once existed. Yet the final chapter of the story would not be written by protocol officers, commentators, or even palace aides, but by the institution itself. When royal controversies linger, silence often speaks loudly. But eventually, institutions must decide whether to clarify, correct, or simply move forward. As the weeks passed and the immediate shock of the Sandringham controversy began to settle, the monarchy found itself confronting a familiar challenge. The event itself was over. The Christmas service had come and gone. The reviews had reportedly taken place. Internal discussions had allegedly been held. Yet one stubborn reality remained unchanged. Questions still existed, and where questions remain unanswered, speculation disappears. Instead, it grows stronger, filling every gap left behind by silence. According to reports circulating among royal commentators, palace officials became increasingly aware that the story was taking on a life beyond its original circumstances. What had started as confusion surrounding attendance procedures was evolving into a broader narrative about communication, authority, and institutional management. The longer uncertainty persisted, the greater the risk that assumptions would replace facts. For an institution whose strength depends heavily on public confidence, that possibility carried serious implications. Behind the scenes, efforts were reportedly made to contain the growing speculation. Not necessarily through dramatic public statements or sweeping declarations, but through quieter measures designed to restore stability. Reassurance became a priority. Family members allegedly sought clarity regarding the events that had unfolded. Staff members reportedly wanted confidence that similar situations would not occur again. The objective was not only to address what had happened, but to prevent lingering doubts from becoming permanent concerns. At the center of those efforts was a determination to learn from the controversy rather than simply move past it. Reports suggested that administrative procedures underwent further review. Systems that had been introduced to improve efficiency were allegedly examined with fresh scrutiny. Every process, every approval stage, and every communication channel became part of a wider effort to understand how a relatively small incident had managed to create such a significant public reaction. The lesson was becoming increasingly clear. Even the most carefully designed systems are only as effective as the people responsible for implementing them. Meanwhile, senior royals reportedly focused on a different objective altogether. Their priority was said to be unity. Throughout its history, the monarchy has survived days of crisis not by eliminating every disagreement, but by projecting continuity through uncertainty. That principle appeared especially relevant now. Whatever differences of opinion may have existed behind closed doors, the institution's long-term stability depended on preserving a sense of cohesion. Public confidence, after all, is built not only on competence but also on the perception of shared purpose. Yet despite those efforts, public attention remained fixed on the unanswered elements of the story. Observers continued analyzing every development. Commentators revisited earlier reports. Royal appearances were examined through a new lens. Ordinary interactions attracted extraordinary scrutiny. The controversy had become one of those rare moments where a relatively small event triggered larger conversations about the future of the institution itself. In many ways, that was the true significance of the Sandringham debate. It was never solely about a guest list, a protocol adjustment, or an administrative misunderstanding. It became a reflection of deeper questions facing a modern monarchy. How should tradition evolve? How should authority be exercised? How can an institution preserve continuity while adapting to changing expectations? These questions extended far beyond one Christmas gathering and touched the very foundations of royal life. By the time the discussion finally began to lose momentum, the monarchy appeared focused on restoring confidence in its processes and reinforcing the principles that had sustained it for generations. Whether every question had been answered mattered less than ensuring future uncertainties could be managed more effectively. The institution had weathered the storm, but not without learning valuable lessons along the way. And while the headlines focused on a single Christmas service, the true lesson extended far beyond one winter morning. In the end, the controversy was never just about whether Zara Tindall entered a church service. It became a story about tradition, belonging, and the delicate machinery that keeps one of the world's most famous institutions functioning. As the dust slowly settled and the intense speculation began to fade, a clearer picture started to emerge, not necessarily of what happened, but of why the story captured so much attention in the first place. From the outside, the controversy appeared surprisingly small. A question about access, a discussion about procedure, a moment of confusion that lasted only a short period of time. Yet beneath that seemingly minor incident lay something far more significant. It exposed how even the smallest administrative decision can ripple through an institution built on symbolism, history, and public perception. In a monarchy where every gesture carries meaning, there are no truly insignificant moments. What made the story resonate so deeply was not the uncertainty itself, but what that uncertainty represented. For generations, the royal family has projected an image of continuity through carefully maintained traditions. Those traditions create familiarity. They create stability. They reassure people that despite changing governments, shifting social expectations, and the relentless passage of time, certain foundations remain unchanged. But the Sandringham controversy revealed how fragile that balance can sometimes become. A single procedural question unexpectedly opened a much larger conversation about identity, access, and belonging. Throughout that discussion, Zara Tindall remained at the center of the narrative, not because of controversy, but because of her place within the wider royal story. Over the years, she has come to symbolize a unique connection between royal tradition and modern life. Her presence has always felt natural rather than formal, personal rather than institutional. That reality is precisely why the incident attracted so much attention. People were not merely reacting to reports of confusion, they were reacting to the idea that long-established assumptions could suddenly be challenged by changing procedures. In many ways, the episode highlighted one of the monarchy's greatest ongoing challenges. Protocol is necessary. Institutions cannot function without structure, accountability, and clearly defined rules. Yet family relationships rarely fit neatly inside administrative frameworks. Loyalty, familiarity, trust, and history cannot always be measured through procedures alone. The challenge facing any modern monarchy is determining where those two worlds meet. Too much flexibility can create inconsistency. Too much rigidity can create distance. Finding the balance remains an endless task. The reported reviews and discussions that followed the controversy allegedly reflected that reality. Beyond identifying mistakes or refining procedures, there appeared to be a broader effort to understand how institutional efficiency could coexist with family continuity. Lessons were learned, questions were asked, systems were reconsidered. Whether every concern was resolved may never be fully known, but the experience undoubtedly reinforced an important truth. The smallest oversight can become a major story when it touches traditions people care deeply about. At the same time, the controversy served as a reminder that public perception often becomes as influential as reality itself. In royal life, stories are rarely judged solely by facts. They are shaped by emotions, expectations, and symbolism. Once a narrative begins taking hold, it can become difficult to control. That is why some questions surrounding the incident may never receive definitive answers. The public conversation eventually moves forward, but the mystery often lingers. Yet perhaps the most enduring lesson is that institutions evolve, while family connections endure. Rules change, procedures are updated, administrations come and go. But the bonds that define a family often survive challenges that would overwhelm lesser organizations. The House of Windsor has weathered countless storms throughout its history, adapting repeatedly while preserving its core identity. Because within the House of Windsor, the greatest battles are rarely fought in public, they unfold quietly behind historic walls, where tradition and change remain locked in an endless struggle for the future. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.